Hey there everyone. In this video I was going to talk about why Daniel should be interpreted symbolically rather than literally, but then I realized that that is really easy to see and we don't really need a video explaining that because it'll become so apparent as we go through the chapters. So here we're just going to start with Daniel 2 and go through the chapter and see what it's about. So we're not going to read the whole thing, but I certainly invite you to do so, along with praying and asking for the Spirit's guidance to understand. But just quickly recap on what's happening here. Daniel is captive in Babylon. It's the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that you can read about in Daniel 2. And this dream, the problem is he couldn't remember what it was. So he commissioned all of the magicians and everyone in the kingdom saying, tell me of this dream and the interpretation of it. And no one could, and so then it came to the point where he was threatening to have all the magicians slain. And then Daniel came along and said, hey, wait, no, don't do that, because he was counted as one of the magicians. And so, to slay them would be slain Daniel along with some of the Hebrews. So he said that he would give the interpretation. And so when we get to verse 25 of Daniel 2, that's when Daniel is taken in to the king to tell him the dream and the interpretation. So we're going to be looking at this chapter from starting at verse 25. So it says here, Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers shew unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, and his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, Forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and shall stand forever. Forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is, that your God is a God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing that thou couldst reveal the secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over all the province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Okay, so here we just went through the chapter, and we're just going to make a few observations now. Okay, so Daniel saw this image where you have this head of gold, breast of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet part iron and part clay. And the stone comes and breaks this image. And as we saw clearly in verse 45, the stone was cut out of a mountain without hands and broke the image, etc., etc. So Daniel not only gave him the vision, but gave him the interpretation. And in that interpretation, he clearly explained, Thou, O Nebuchadnezzar, art this great head, and after your kingdom will come another kingdom, and after that kingdom will come another kingdom, and after that kingdom will come another kingdom. And it was very clear. And even in Daniel, we have explained a little bit further what happened, because in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon, is described as coming to an end, and then after that, Medo-Persia rising up. So it's very clear that after his kingdom would rise another kingdom, which was Medo-Persia, right? It was just really straightforward. So the head represented Babylon, the breast represented Medo-Persia, and this is very clear as far as you have gold, silver, brass, iron, right? Gold is the number one metal, right? And then silver, and then brass or bronze, and then iron, and it's talking about value of metals. And so these things are understood and known, and it's not difficult to see. So you have the kingdom that came after Babylon was Medo-Persia. The kingdom that came after Medo-Persia was Greece. And that's also recorded in Daniel chapter 8, which we won't get into now because we'll have a separate video on that. But if you read verses 20 and 21, it even explains about after Medo-Persia is Greece, and that's in chapter 8. Okay, so after that we have the fourth kingdom, right? We have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. The fourth kingdom, it doesn't say specifically in Daniel what that kingdom is, but history bears it out very clearly that that fourth kingdom was Rome, right? And as Daniel 7 repeats this, we'll see it repeat very clearly what happens. We won't get into it now. But this fourth kingdom is very strong, and it breaks in pieces, and subdues all the other kingdoms, and so on and so forth. And that's basically what Rome did, right? It's really easy to see this. So now we have this next symbol, which is the stone. And it says the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it hit the image upon the feet, which break in pieces all these kingdoms. And we saw that, let's just compare quickly verses 34 with 44. And I'm just going to ask you what it says. This gives the interpretation. We have verses 31 to 35, where Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar the dream itself. And then verses 36 to 45, Daniel is giving the interpretation of the dream. So verse 34 is parallel to verse 44. Verse 34 is giving the dream, 44 the interpretation. So what we're going to ask is, what is the stone? Because we saw what all these other kingdoms represent, and then the stone comes. So just according to the interpretation that Daniel gave, what does the stone represent? Verse 34, Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Okay, now verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Okay, so we see that the stone clearly is the thing that broke the image in verse 34. And then the thing which is said to break the image in verse 44, the explanation, is the kingdom. So clearly the stone represents the kingdom. That should be really straightforward, really easy to see. And it says, in the days of these kings. In the days of what kings? Well, of course, in the days of the kings of the feet, because that's when the stone hit the image, in the days of the feet. And that's what was described in verses 41 to 43, where, in the days of these kings, what kings? The kings just referenced. So that should be pretty straightforward. Another thing that I want to point out that I mentioned in the last video is that in Daniel chapter 10, verse 21, just before the angel delineates the contents of Daniel 11 to Daniel, the angel says, But I will shew thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. That which is noted in the scripture of truth for Daniel was the writings of the prophets previous to him. So, as Daniel 11 was only repeating and enlarging Daniel 8, which was only repeating and enlarging Daniel 7, which was only repeating and enlarging Daniel 2, we can see that the things that were shown to Daniel in chapters 2, 7, 8, and 11, which also goes into 12, we can see that the things that were shown him in all those chapters are also recorded and delineated and revealed in the writings of the prophets previous to him. So, this kingdom, breaking in pieces all these other kingdoms, must be revealed in the prophecies. So, we have, for example, Isaiah chapter 60 reveals this, and there's a video I have here on Isaiah 60 that will go into more detail. But Isaiah chapter 60 verse 12 says, For the nation and the kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish, yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted. And read Isaiah 60, please. Go and read the whole thing and view the video that I have on Isaiah 60. It's in a playlist on this channel called Isaiah. And it's just pretty clear. It says, okay, the nation and the kingdom that shall not serve thee shall perish, but shall be wasted. And then we also have in Jeremiah 51, 19 to 21, which of course we know Daniel was studying Jeremiah. It tells us that in Daniel 9. So Jeremiah chapter 51, verses 19 to 21, it says, The portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. Thou art my battle axe, and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms. And with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider, and with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider. So very clear, he's to use his people to break in pieces all the other kingdoms. So now we're going to just consider a few things. We're also told that this stone comes from the mountain. So we just saw that the stone breaks in pieces all these kingdoms, and all these other prophecies point to his people breaking in pieces these kingdoms. So many assume that this stone represents Jesus at his second coming. But as we've seen from these other prophecies, he's to break these kingdoms through his people, right? Now, the other thing that doesn't quite work is we have this aspect of the stone being cut out of the mountain. And many people, in Revelation seminars or in other types of meetings, evangelistic meetings, will show short videos or animated film clips of the stone just coming from the sky or from heaven, when really the scriptures say in Daniel 2 verse 45 that the stone comes from the mountain. And what do mountains represent? Isaiah 2 verse 2 and 3. It says, "And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So, very easy to see there. It says that he will set up his mountain on top of all the other mountains. Is he literally going to take a mountain and stack it on top of other mountains? And why does it say that the people will say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob," right? Clearly showing the mountain of the Lord is the house of the God of Jacob. And what's the house of God? Save the house of Israel, right? And Israel, in that context would be both kingdoms, for according to Ezekiel 37, both houses of Israel, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, shall no longer be two kingdoms divided, but shall be one kingdom united, one house under the Lord. So we have here the mountain Lord represents his people, but we have this stone cut without hands, right? And the stone is to be used to break in pieces all these other kingdoms. So the mountain is his people, but we saw that the stone, which is a part of the mountain, must also then represent his people. But of course would be the righteous remnant, because he doesn't take the whole mountain and cast it onto this image. So there must be something that takes place to separate the, righteous from the wicked, or must be used to separate the stone from the rest of the mountain. And so this is talking about the kingdom of heaven, right? Christ's kingdom. Now in Matthew 13, Christ gives parables of the kingdom. And we won't go through it all now, and I'm sure we'll have other videos on this at some point, but he says that the kingdom of heaven, and this is Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 it starts, where it gives the parable of the wheat and tares. And basically says the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that, plants a field and so on, and he plants wheat, but yet when his workers or the watchmen were sleeping, somebody else sowed tares among the wheat. And then he says that he'll send forth reapers, and they will sever the wicked from among the just, right? Separate the wheat and the tares. And then in verse 41 to 43 it says, "The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear." So, pretty simple there. that he'll separate the wheat and the tares, and then the righteous shall stand forth in the kingdom. So we have this similar type of thing going on in Daniel 2, where you have a separation of the stone from the mountain, and then the stone is used to break in pieces all these other kingdoms, right? And it shall stand as the kingdom, united. Now, what happens to this stone after it smites the image? Well, according to verse 35, and we already read it, so I'm not going to go over it again. In verse 35, it says that after the stone smites the image, the stone itself grows and becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth. Well, again, Matthew 13 in the parables, notice what it says in verse 31. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is become the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. So notice he says that his kingdom is to be like a mustard seed, which is the tiniest, the smallest, most insignificant of all seeds. But it will grow and become a great tree. So we see his kingdom starts small, but it grows and becomes a great tree. Is this not what we see in Daniel chapter 2, where we see this stone? A stone is something relatively small, and it is cut out of the mountain, and it grows and becomes this great mountain. Now, what could that possibly mean? Well, of course, we understand it with the mustard seed. We understand that his kingdom growing is people joining and accepting the truth. Just like we saw in Isaiah chapter 2, right? That many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, right? And so that is going to happen here in the last days. Read also Zechariah 8 with all these things in mind. So hopefully that's pretty clear. Now we can see we have this image, just to recap. We have this image, we have the head of gold, the breast and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part clay. And then we have this mountain, which represents God's people, and there's a separation that takes place to get the stone from the mountain, which represents the righteous remnant from among God's people, and they break in pieces and destroy all these kingdoms in the days of these kings, so that the kingdom may grow and become a great mountain till it finally fills the whole earth. So anyways, that's just a simple going through of Daniel 2. Some people, the implications of what all those things mean might, people might have an issue with some of those things because it contradicts their present understanding. But should we take our present understanding and use that to dispute with what the scriptures clearly teach? Or should we conform our understanding to be in harmony with what the scriptures clearly teach? So if there's anything that I've said in this video that has been unbiblical, or anything that I've said that has been unclear, please comment and we can discuss these things. And if you can just look and clearly see that everything that I've said has been in harmony with the scriptures, then don't try to fight against it. Accept the truth for what it is, and really just seek the Lord and His righteousness and pure unadulterated truth, because really, why would we want error? So anyways, blessings to you all. I hope that this has been enlightening and is shed light on a few things that perhaps you haven't considered. So blessings to you all. Stay tuned for the Daniel 7 video, and in that video I'll likely reference back to this one and tie in a few more things that I didn't really touch on here. But yeah, anyways, fare thee well.